Please give a warm welcome to my sister, Amy.
I just wanted to thank my brother for doing this event. You have no idea how nerve-wracking it is for a first-time person to put together a big event like this and coordinate all the books and this great reception that he had there. I feel very lucky. I have such a thoughtful, kind brother, and we're very close. As you can see, John is my little brother. He's 2 years younger. And I had told some people that I actually grew up part of my childhood in Santa Rosa, if you can believe that. From the 3rd grade to the 5th grade, we lived on Sacramento Street and Sartori Drive. So this is our house on Sacramento Street. I'm about 8 years old. And one of the things that happened that was very formative for me being in Santa Rosa at the time was the creek nearby, Matanzas Creek, which was just a half a block away. And I spent a lot of my time playing down there and getting to know wildlife, creatures, mostly snakes, some frogs, tadpoles, lizards, things like that. And that was near, very close to where we were. But I also loved the library. I was a big, big reader. Every week we would go to the library. It was a very old library at the time, and they wanted to raise money to build a new library, and they had a contest for grade school children, where I think it was 1st grade to high school, through high school. And out of those thousands of students, I won in the elementary school division an essay, What the Library Means to Me. And I think I won because at the very end, and I knew this would really get people, I said, I love the library so much, I gave 18 cents, my entire fortune, to Citizens for Santa Rosa Library. And I knew they'd love that, and it would lead to people giving their life savings away to the library. So this is this appeared in the Santa Rosa Press Democrat. It is when I won the contest, and there we are. Look how happy the other students look. Sometimes what happens in childhood, though, sticks with you. Like those lovely days of playing in the creek, that stayed with me. But also this report card lacks imagination or drive, which are necessary to a deeper creative level. And that was from my art teacher. So for a very long time, I did not do anything related to art. I still would doodle and things like that. But for a very, very long time, I did not attempt to draw in any formal sense of the word. 2016 came along, and there was an increase in the amount of racism that was directed toward Asian Americans at a level I'd never experienced before. I had a lot of people say to me, not a lot, but enough that you react to it as if you're gut punched. And they would say to me, go back to where you came from. And I'd say, Oakland? It was so ugly. I needed to do something. And I found that I could get a new remote one day. I found that beauty is the antidote to ugliness. And I went back into nature. Those days, as they were in Santa Rosa, just being out in the wild and looking at creatures very close up. My teacher, who taught me how to do nature journaling and hence drawing, had a lot of advice about what nature journaling is. Basically, it is observation, prolonged attention to many things that are out there in the natural world. You could focus on a leaf, a bug, or a bird. And he made this point, which I came to understand gradually, that in nature, paying attention becomes love, and that intentional curiosity becomes love. In other words, what you're going to see in this journal is the growth of that love, the growth of my attention, and the reason why I am so absolutely curious. And I think this is something everyone can do. It is so important in times of stress and strife where you need to find balance again. And you can go into this place. It is the one time probably that I have been able to keep myself in the moment. Because when you're profoundly curious about something, your mind is not on what happened last week or what will happen in the future. You're right there. And that paying attention in the moment relieves stress so much. And so I really recommend that to you. If you're feeling a lot of stress, just go out, sit in one spot, pay attention, and see what you can find. A lot of people wonder what the backyard looks like, and I will say I have a yard that's similar to the kind of yards you probably have here. You have oak trees, you have a lot of greenery, open spaces, that former golf course or whatever it is now. And so you have birds. And I have a garden. What it is now is a succulent garden. We have native plants. We planted it for pollinators, and that's really important, not only from a conservation level, but for attracting birds. So people say, you don't need feeders, just plant pollinating, things for pollinators, food for birds. That's exactly what we have here. And we still have feeders. The other thing, if you want to attract birds, is that you have bowls of water that you change every single day. And that's really important because you can have birds with diseases coming in there, and other birds can get sick as a result. And so we have these, they're just really shallow saucers. And that's important too. Big fountains, deep, beautiful Italianate fountains. They're too deep for most birds. And little birds, most songbirds, do not swim. They will drown. So I recommend putting a rock in these shallow bowls, putting in about an inch of water, and birds just absolutely love that. Because it is an oak habitat, those are the kinds of birds that I have. When I started looking at birds, I did not recognize very many. In fact, I would say there were 3 birds I saw that I knew the names of. That would be the crow, and that would be a hummingbird, but I didn't know what kind I had. It had a kind of a red head at times. When it changed directions, I could see the red. And then there was something I called a jay, a blue jay. Well, it turns out we don't have blue jays in California. It was a jay. It was a scrub jay, and that's probably what you would see here as well in Santa Rosa. They're kind of that's a baby scrub jay, a fledgling right there. But those are these larger birds. They're kind of screechy. They're bullies. They're hilarious. All these birds can be hilarious. That bird, the little bird over on the right, I didn't know what that bird was when I first saw it. I thought I had a new species, and it turned out it was a fledgling junco, and I had a lot of juncos in there. So what you begin to notice as you develop this interest in birds, you'll start seeing the babies. I still call them babies. People like to say fledglings. I began to recognize female birds, which are different from male birds. And in fact, I started after a while making it my mission to draw female birds in color because they get such short shrift and they often do the work. Ladies, you will appreciate this. A hummingbird, beautiful hummingbird there. She watches this wonderful courtship display. The males are doing these deep dives in front, all singing like crazy, battling with other males over the food to show he's a great mate, great genes. And so eventually the females say, okay, they go to the bower, a tree limb. She's there. He does his deed, 4 seconds, okay, 4 seconds. And then he's gone, okay. She has to build the nest, tend to the babies, feed the babies, teach the babies when they're born to take care of themselves. Dad's gone off to see other girlfriends. So I started drawing female birds. These are also some of the birds in the yard. I would imagine most of these birds are ones that you would see here in Santa Rosa, in Oakmont. But I want you to look at these pictures of these birds and tell me if you can see anything that is something they have in common. Now, often we are looking at, my husband says, I know. What they have in common is not always looks. You know, when I'm looking at birds, what I notice that they might have in common or might be different is a certain kind of behavior. So if you look at the behavior of these birds, except for that little guy that's not paying attention up in the upper left-hand corner, all of these birds are looking at me. Well, maybe not the pygmy nuthatches, but almost all of them look at me. And that was when I fell in love with birds too, when you're watching them and you can barely see them, then you see them, and then they turn around and they look at you, and they keep looking at you, and they go back to doing what they're doing, and you feel like, oh my God, it trusts me, I'm accepted, and you just completely fall in love with birds. When I was learning to draw, I was so concerned about looking like I knew how to draw birds when I did not at all. And I want to show you what the early drawings look like, because a lot of people look at the drawings they do now and say, you have such talent, you're so good. And I think, yeah, you know, this is talent that's honed from thousands and thousands of hours of what's called pencil miles. Pencil miles are practice. And I would draw every single day, and I would do head shapes in different directions and things. So I say this, and it's not bull. It's really that any of you here can learn to draw birds if you really want to. You would go to a site called johnmuirlaws.com. You would look at his videos, the same classes I took. You would practice. Maybe you'd buy his book, and you would practice every day, and you can draw birds too. It's a wonderful way to also learn about birds. I did something called negative space. You learn the shapes of birds, and when you do drawings, you find out that every single part of the bird has a purpose. But you also find that what you perceive to be the case with birds or with people or with anything you see in the world, it's really not what you assume. So everybody thinks birds are perfectly round in their head, perfectly round in their belly. And in fact, they have a skeletal structure underneath them, and it follows the shape of that skeletal structure. And so the angles are actually pretty straight. You have from the neck, a line that comes here, a line that comes almost straight, a line that comes down here. And so you see it's not always perfectly round. One of the things that Jack Laws said to me, all of us in the workshops was, when you go to draw a bird, feel the bird. Imagine that you're feeling the bird, meaning almost as though you're touching the bird and feeling the shapes of it. And the other thing he said is, imagine the life force of the bird. Well, I'm a fiction writer, and I took it one step forward, and that is that I imagined I was the bird. I was the bird looking at this creature with these really large, dark eyes looking at it. And no wonder this bird always took off. The moment I picked up my binoculars to look at it, they took off. The moment I picked up a camera, they took off. And so I learned that what I had to do was be very still, to imagine I was the bird that was looking at me. Everybody has what's called a spark bird. And that is the bird that first made you fall in love with birds. Now mine, I would say, was the hummingbird. And that was because I learned its song. There are several songs or calls that it makes. And one of them sounds very scratchy. It's sort of like shh, shh, shh. And I learned that intonation pattern, and when I would sing that to the bird, the hummingbird, it would answer back in a similar fashion, and then come. Now I thought I had read something that you could buy these little hand feeders and train a hummingbird to come and sit on your hand and drink from your hand. And it's like, yeah, that's a scam, you know. But it was only a couple of dollars, and I said, why not, you know? So I put the little bird feeder on a rail about 10 feet away. Then the hummingbird came immediately to investigate. I put it closer, eventually to the table where I was seated having lunch. And by the next day, when I put it out, the hummingbird came immediately. And when I put that in my hand, the hummingbird came to my hand and started to feed. I started to talk to it. And I shouldn't have done that, I suppose, because I don't know whether that would have scared the hummingbird away. But I just said, "You are so beautiful." And it looked up. And I see these dark eyes looking at me, and then went back to eating. Now, you can't help but fall in love when you see that happen. You know, I do believe they don't see me as a friend. They don't love me the way I love them. I think they see me as a large, flightless creature who brings out food sources. And that's fine with me. In terms of food sources, let me just say something about hummingbirds. It's really important if you want to attract hummingbirds, it's one of the most joyful things you can do. I recommend these ugly plastic feeders that are red because they're easier to clean. A lot of the fancy ones with the narrow bottles and openings, they're very hard to clean. And I found that all the fancy ones I bought ended up in being given away because they don't work for me. The other thing is, if you want to do this, it's the recipe for making hummingbird nectar includes no red dye. It is 1 part sugar to 4 parts water. And it's the plain old cane sugar, granulated C&H cane sugar, not organic, not brown, not confectioners, not bakers, and not honey, not some kind of diet stevia thing, not maple syrup, not anything else. It's sweet. It is only white cane sugar. Honey, for example, will mold immediately and be toxic to birds. And the stickiness is hard for them to then retract and then eat further as they go from flower to flower. So that's the recipe, very simple. There's another bird there I call the spark bird, and that was a bird, a pine siskin. It came in December, and I thought it was a baby bird. It was so fluffy and beautiful and was eating like crazy. I thought, oh, it's so hungry because it's traveled so far. It's a migrant. And then I thought, there are no baby birds in December. And then I noticed it was not really eating. All the food was coming out of the side or from the back. And the bird was actually sick. Called up Fish and Wildlife and discovered there was a salmonellosis epidemic among finches, and this is a finch. Pine siskin is a finch. It occurs a lot among finches because they are together in large social groups, so it's easy to infect other birds. I heard recently there might be an outbreak somewhere. If you see that happen, take down all your feeders for at least 2 weeks, and these birds will disperse immediately. Clean all your feeders, clean your water bowls well. The first time I saw this happen, I was so crushed knowing this bird would die within the day. It's fluffy because it can't thermoregulate anymore. I took all my feeders down for 4 months, and I decided I'd never do this again. 4 months later, I decided I was ready to try it. But that's how much it broke my heart. And so it was a spark bird for conservation. And I joined the board of American Bird Conservancy. I found that my concern for an individual bird extended to all birds, species of birds, individual birds. bird habitat. And so I call that my spark bird as well. I became so obsessed with birds that I started becoming like an obsessive mother who wants to have her kid eat only organic food, non-GMO, looking at all the ingredients and everything. So it's an endless search. I still do it. And one of the things as I was doing this journal, because the journal was just for me, this never was supposed to be published. This was just for me. So I could just have all this fun with it, like all the foods that I was serving these birds. A spicy suet, which is what the squirrels hated. And that's how I got rid of the squirrels. They didn't die. They just took one bite, and then they left, and they didn't come back again. Nuts and chews, Niger for the finches, sunflower seeds, and especially Alaskan taste water. Duncan drunk, why go all the way north to the ice cap? We have floods of water here. A little joke on climate warming. I became so obsessed that I actually started buying mealworms. I heard that birds somehow like these, especially when they were nesting and when the fledglings were born, came out. And this is what I call pathological because they're expensive. It was like $400 a month. I started off with 1,000 thinking that's going to last me weeks and weeks and weeks. Somebody told me she fed her birds 1 or 2 a day. Well, I tried that, and suddenly it became they were eating 200 a day, and then 500 a day, and then 1,000 a day. And suddenly I was buying 20,000 worms at one time. I have a very nice husband. We've been together for 54 years. And I say that because mealworms mealworms are actually larvae. They're not worms at all. They're not annelids like you see in the dirt. And if you do not keep them from metamorphizing into something else, they will become beetles. And birds do not eat those beetles. So I had to put these in the refrigerator. Live mealworms. And when I did that, when I got up to 20,000 mealworms each time, finally Lou said, Amy, we don't even have room in the fridge for the dog food. Instead of getting divorced, we got a new refrigerator. So all of that drawing practice did have an effect, and I started drawing both the sketches, the rough sketches you'll see in the book that are about behavior, but also these more colorful colored pencil drawings. All of these birds are birds that looked at me. These are birds only from my backyard. They are based on photos only I took. And that was my own rule about what I wanted to have in this journal, that it was so deeply personal. I wanted that to be the criteria for including them. You see here the very center picture at the top is a female hummingbird, a female Anna's hummingbird. They don't have that iridescent red-pink cap or hood. And the bird that is at the top on the left-hand side, or your right-hand side, that is a female, again, a female Townsend's warbler. The males are always more striking, blacker mask and brilliant yellow, but that is a female. Tribute to the female birds. One of the things that I learned as I was drawing were all the functional parts of the feathers, and I included them. My drawings are very representational. They are not creative. I'm trying to understand how birds are put together, hence the nature of the drawings that I did, including so much of this detail you probably would not see from a distance. But just remember that I am doing this to learn more about birds. And what I did learn were behaviors that I had never thought about before, such as how do fledglings learn to eat? Well, once their parents leave them and are no longer shoving food down their throats, they have to go out and discover what is edible. They might pick up poop. They might pick up a large acorn and try to swallow that. They don't know how to rotate any of that food around their tongue. So they'll pick up an acorn, it's way too large for it, throw its head back, and just wait for the food to fall down its throat, because that's what the parents did. So what I ended up seeing were many trial and errors of these birds seeing what food was and finally learning how to eat. In fact, one time it was a little oak titmouse watching a chestnut-backed chickadee. The chickadee took a little piece of sunflower chip, put it between its foot, and pecked at it, and then ate that, rolling its tongue and swallowing it. And you could see this oak titmouse saying to itself, that's how it's done. Saying to itself in bird-like thing, like, woo, and immediately did the same thing, which was so fascinating. So in around April, May, June, July, August, you can see these birds. Some of them come out earlier than others. Watch their behavior. It is fascinating how fast they have to learn this, learning to jump from one high place to another, and they do it in graduated levels. There will always be a leader, and there will be these followers. And if you watch them over time, you get to see perhaps which ones remain the leaders, and also the moment in which they become less cooperative with each other and start fighting for territory as well as food. I read this article in which it said that crows can recognize humans that have been mean to them. And I had a problem with these crows coming to our yard and eating all the food. The big birds are always bullying the little birds, eating up everything. Little birds can't get to it. And so I wanted to have fewer crows. So I thought about this, and I thought about this story I'd read. And so I went and bought a dead crow. It cost $14.99 at Wild Birds Unlimited. I hung it upside down. I messed it up a little. I had these black chicken feathers or something. Hung it upside down. And suddenly there were all these crows. I guess one of them flew over and looked and said, "Oh my God, Squeaky has been killed." And suddenly there were, just dozens of these crows screaming like, "Oh my God, look what happened." And I thought, wait a minute. They're supposed to recognize crows that are in their clan. I don't think this fake crow ever was part of its clan, but still, it worked, and the crows stopped coming to the yard. So $14.99, somebody was talking to a guy at Wild Birds Unlimited, asking him, how do I get rid of the crows coming? And he said, I don't know. And I said, you have the answer right here in your store, actually. So that worked. Part of the thing that happened, though, is I started asking myself about the emotions of birds. Now, we have our own kinds of emotions, and I wondered, are these analogs maybe to the kind of emotions that birds have? We have love. Do they have love? How do they show that love? Do they have jealousy? Do they have embarrassment or shame or all of these kinds of things? And so they're very anthropomorphic questions about what bird feelings are. And I think some of the things that I was seeing was governed by instinct. And as an example, if you have a little bird that jumps on the back of a big bird that is eating something delicious, that big bird automatically leaps up in the air, and often being startled will drop the food, and the little bird can get that food. So they understand these things that go on within in the bird world. And I was privileged to see some of this. Some of the most interesting birds to see are the fledgling scrub jays, mostly because they are so smart. They are corvids, like crows and ravens. And I would see them trying to master the bird feeders. They would be swinging, they would be trying to get in, they would be falling off, lose their balance, then screaming for mom. Mom would come, do one last feeding. That's the last vomit you're going to get. And then they would scream more. And what was impressive about these birds to me is their degree of persistence. This little bird would stay there for hours trying to break into this feeder. And that to me then became my sense that intelligence has something to do with persistence. I think that's true for many people in life, that at certain kinds of jobs you have, like my brother who used to do help people with technical problems with their computers. And John would say to me, you just have to be patient and persistent. You just keep trying every little thing. And it starts with somebody who says, my computer, it doesn't work. And you just look and see if it's plugged in. If it is, then you go to the next step and the next step, and it may take, an hour before you come to that. But some of these things, the skills that people have, include the quality called persistence, and that's what these scrub jays have. Crows have that. They are so hilarious when they're learning to defend themselves. They were a gang together, very cooperative, these fledglings, and then soon they took up guarding and stealing and intimidation. They would sneak up on each other. They would do different poses. I love the behavior of one of them that went to the tree branch that was above this bowl of dead mealworms that the songbirds wouldn't eat. And he took an acorn, and I don't know whether this is accidental or intentional, dropped that acorn right smack dab into the middle of that bowl, which scared all the birds away. And it looked down, it seemed very pleased with itself. I noticed behavior also that seemed to have no purpose. It might be a junco that was on a little swing that I used as stepping stone for little birds to get into a feeder so they could perch on it and then leap into a cage that I had made. But I found that sometimes birds would do a repetitive behavior that seemed to have no purpose whatsoever. And this is what comes of staring at the same birds day after day for hours. Suddenly you start to see a pattern. And you notice that there is no purpose other than perhaps the bird just likes it. And that this swinging motion must be like what it feels when it's on a windy day, perched in a tree somewhere, and it's got this ability to hang on no matter what happens. Well, that's a lot like what you see at the Olympics. These people are showing their physical strength. It's fun for them. They have mastered certain skills that many of us can't do. And I think that birds to some degree, or animals, at least those that become the ones that are successful, have this ability to practice many of these different moves that will enable them to survive. One day, Lou called me. We had been draining our cistern, which holds about 4,000 gallons. There was something wrong, and we had to drain it. And you can imagine, this is occurring during the drought, where our landscape person had to come, and there's 4,000 gallons of water streaming down the retaining wall into the street. And of course, neighbors are thinking, we're wasting a lot of water here. We started to see that these birds, this California towhee, would start at the top and go sliding down. And then there were other birds, other towhees, and also golden-crowned sparrows that were watching. And then the bird would go to the top again and go down. Now, what is the purpose of that behavior? I think it was showing off. I also think that birds are a lot smarter than most people, certainly more than I ever thought they were. They're smarter than I ever thought they were. There was a female house finch that was flying in front of the window where I was seated, and it seemed to be looking at me, frantic, going back and forth. Now, most people would say, it's the reflection in the mirror, it's fighting with itself. And I said, well, it's a female. It's not a male guarding territory, and it's not the courting season. It's not during that time. And I then noticed it going to a feeder nearby, sitting in this little basket of seeds. It didn't bother to eat the seeds that were in there. And then it flew back, and it was going back and forth and back and forth. And suddenly, dumb me, I look, and right there on the window is a window feeder with its favorite feeder with sunflower chips in it, and it is empty. And I thought, could it possibly be trying to communicate to me that this feeder is empty, that it knows I am the bringer of the food? And I thought about these other instances when I've taken the feeders away because of illness, and the birds would come to the window and look at me. And they would tap on the window, just 2 polite taps, and then look at me. And that they would follow me from window to window. And the next time I opened the door, they would fly in, knowing this is where the food was. So I looked at that bird and I said, ha. I went and got that feeder and I filled it up. I put it back. The house finch had been sitting on a rail nearby watching me, and as soon as I went in the house, it went to the feeder and ate and ate and ate, and then it left. So these are just guesses of mine. I have to remind myself, or I remind you, I'm not a biologist, I'm not an ornithologist. These are just guesses, and that's fine. To enjoy birds, you do not need to be an expert. You can be wrong about what they're doing. As long as your misinterpretations are not going to be harmful to birds. I did attempt to do some scientific studies, and this is one of them. After watching these owls for many years, I decided that I would try to capture the emotions of an owl. And so you see, here they are. I love attack human face. I've had a number of people who have thanked me because now they know when to run. We were very lucky, having those 2 owls. Every day Lou would greet me with a cup of coffee and he'd say whether Mom and Junior were in the tree, whether they had come back from their night of hunting. And so that was the reason to get up out of bed, immediately, shoot out of bed. Don't bother to read the email, just get out of bed and go look at them. Stand on the terrace, and just look at them. And that's what I would see. There are some tragic things that if you see birds long enough, you watch them long enough, you'll see some things that are rather sad. And one of them is window strikes. Window strikes happen to everybody. No matter how careful you are, they're going to happen, but there are ways to decrease window strikes. So in the early days, before I knew what some of those were, I would get a window strike, probably about 1 a year. Some of the birds, there were more birds that hit the window but did not die, at least not in front of me. A lot of the birds that hit and are knocked out and come back and then take off, they're actually not okay. They probably go off later. They have internal injuries and they die away from where they hit the window. So this was very distressing to me, and if any of you have ever experienced it, then you know how incredibly sad it is to see this, and I don't know, some of you might feel guilty. I certainly did. Beautiful hermit thrush. They seem to be a bird that commonly strikes windows. I don't know why. Certain birds are more vulnerable to that. And so I was determined to do something about it. I tried decals. I spaced apart 3 of them on a window. That wasn't enough. I discovered that you had to have them much closer, about 2 inches apart at most. So I just started drawing with an acrylic water-based pen that cost me $1.50, spider webs all over my windows. And I was happy to block my view windows with those spider webs because the pain of seeing a bird kill itself on the window was just too much. I've had people actually think it's very artistic, or that I had the mafia come and blast my window with machine gun fire. But I did, in case any of you are wondering what you can get, I did some research, and I had been thinking about trying this on some of my windows. It's a company called Feather Friendly. They have this tape I think you can get it 6 inches wide. It has little dots on it. And when you put it on and smooth it, you can see through your windows, and the dots kind of just disappear after a while. And birds, you have to put it on the exterior of your window. Birds can actually see this, and it will stop them and at least slow them down. I have literally seen birds head for the window, then put on the brakes, so to speak, and stop, and then take off the other way. So it does work for them to see. It is not a pass-through kind of situation. I say this at every talk that I do, and that is that when we look at the threats that harm our birds, loss of habitat is one, but among the ones that are kind of human-caused in a way is cats, outdoor cats. They kill between 1.5 and 4 billion birds a year. I have a cat that recently has been coming into my yard, and I saw it take off after a mourning dove, and what was left was a big pile of feathers. Now, the bird did get away, but because that cat probably sunk its claws into the back of the bird to pull off those feathers, that's a dead bird. It took off, but the little amount of scratch, puncture that it received from the cat means that if it does not get antibiotics and treatment at a rehab center, it's a bird that's dead. So when you see birds, especially the slow birds that you have, mourning doves, band-tailed pigeons, quail, baby quail, those are dead birds if you have outdoor cats. You're not going to see those anymore after a while. They are so effective as hunters. And I had a cat, and it was an outdoor cat for a while. Fortunate thing is, before I even cared about birds, I clipped the cat's nails from the time that we had this cat as a baby. And the reason I did that is because it was a feral cat, and it liked to bite people. So I couldn't stop it from biting, but I could stop it from grabbing onto somebody and pulling it over and chomping down. And it was to save my furniture, not birds. So that is the number one killer, a very sad fact. I love cats, but watching birds also causes me to meditate on many different things. And one of them is our own morality and how we feel about living creatures. I think that's a wonderful thing that being in nature provokes. What is our responsibility toward nature? How do we feel about death in nature? I hear this expression all the time. It's the circle of life. So when somebody sees a dead animal that's been killed by another one, say a coyote that has killed a bird, they'll say, or a rat or whatever, they'll say, well, circle of life. And I actually hate that expression because it is like permission to close down your emotions and your feelings that I think are important to have toward any animal, any being that is suffering and is going to die at the expense of another. It's necessary. Birds, predators need to eat, and I understand that. But I also feel it's okay to feel sad that another animal did die as a result of that. So as I said, I just hate the expression because it just doesn't go far enough to explain how there is some sanctity in life of every single creature that we see. They all have a wonderful way in which they contribute to our ecology. Well, I saw these yellow jackets. That was the real test, because these yellow jackets were mobbing the live, very expensive mealworms. And it was eating them live. I mean, you could, if mealworms had voices, they would go, please, please. You know, I could imagine them. I'm a fiction writer. And so I would see this, and I thought, how can I stop these? And I don't want to get stung either. So I got one of those yellow jacket traps, and I put in dog food and sugar, a little this and that. And sure enough, my little yellow jacket bistro attracted a large number of them, and they went in. And then suddenly they realized their predicament, and they were standing on the dog food that was rolling like a log in the river, and then buzzing, and there were other yellow jackets that came, and they were on the outside listening to their comrades in there. And I swear it was like, Betty, hang on, we're going to come and get some help. Just Don't worry about it. And then suddenly the yellow jackets inside gave out a sound, and all the other ones left en masse. And I thought, what happened? What did the other yellow jackets say? Now, obviously, they're aware that something is happening that is a danger. It's a threat to their lives. Are they aware they're going to die? I don't know. But you look at a scene like this, and you have to then become the yellow jacket, just like I became the bird. And this is what I did. You don't have to do this if you're not a fiction writer. This is good practice if you're a fiction writer. You just become whatever it is that you're looking at. And I actually felt very sorry for the yellow jacket. But this raised into me the moral question, which is, if a creature is lower on what we consider to be its place on the org chart of life, do we then excuse ourselves for having any kind of compassion for those creatures that are being eaten or are being killed, eliminated because some cruel human decided her mealworms cost too much? So I had to ask myself that question and say to myself, no, I should feel compassion for any living creature. This is all to say that being in nature is also a moment of reflection on yourself, about your values, about what's important to you in life, what is beautiful, what is lasting, what is our responsibility to the nature that we love. And that is an individual answer. I won't give you what mine all entails, but it's a wonderful thing. It ends up making me feel that I am doing something that is for the greater good of our planet. And so if you're looking for that kind of meaning, I really recommend you might look into how birds can foster that. One last thing that I will say about birds, if you want to start birding, if you haven't been doing it, you don't have to know the names of the birds. You don't have to look at a bird out there and say, oh, yes, that's a scrub jay. You don't have to know any of that. You can just sit in one spot and look at the birds and just say, wow, that's an interesting bird. Oh, wow, look at those colors. And if you're further want to know more information later, you can always find somebody who knows something about birds, or join Audubon or Bird Alliance and have somebody tell you the names of those, or get a guide. But I say this thing about you don't have to do any of that, because so many people are put off by the notion they have to know 900 names of birds and know exactly what they look at to be able to do that. Otherwise, they're just bird watchers. I am a bird watcher. I found that many people have an experience in which somebody dear to them has died. And later they see a bird they've never seen before appear. And there's a feeling, perhaps, that when grief and love coalesce with loss, that maybe there's something magical in a message from a bird that says, I'm fine, I'm free of pain, and here I am to say goodbye, have a great life. Well, I don't know. I thought, who knows if that's true. There's actually a study called avimancy, which looks into that in different cultures. One day, a dear friend of mine who I've known for 50 years, he died of a heart attack. And later, his husband died of a heart attack 6 weeks later, 2 weeks after he visited us. And this guy was so important in my life that I just did wonder a lot about him. He was the kind of guy who would dress up in drag as me. And so shortly after he died, I saw an American robin, which is a bird common enough, but never comes into the yard. And I thought, wow, that's interesting. And then about 5 minutes later, I saw a purple finch. Not a rare bird, but hardly ever came to my yard. I'd seen maybe 2 of them in the years that I'd been birding my yard. And then I saw a Sonoma chipmunk. Chipmunks never come into the yard. I asked my friends that lived in Marin County if they'd ever seen one. None of them had. This chipmunk came in. Toei came over, looked at it for a very long time. Chipmunk just sat there. And then it slowly went into the Andromeda bush and disappeared. And I could hear Asa say, "How many times do I have to get into animal drag before you believe it's me?" So do I believe that our dearly departed sometimes come back? Yeah. Why not? You know, it gives you a sense of hope, of continuity, and a reminder with a little smile of who these people were. Thank you all for listening to these tales about birds, and I hope that you have wonderful experiences, especially during this time of stress, with the birds in your own communities. Thank you so much.
So we're going to have a brief question and answer period now for Amy. So if you have any questions, we have one microphone, so please raise your hand and we'll try to get to as many people as possible. But if you can, just kind of keep your questions brief and pertaining to the book if possible, any questions about birds, or just to give people enough time for Amy to go on and answer another question. And then I just did want to mention also that in room G, the books will be for sale, and Amy will be signing the books that are sold here. And if you've brought your book, if you have your book that you previously purchased, you can get in the queue for the signing, and Amy will sign those also. Okay, did I cover it? Okay, first question, please.
I would like to know where you got the hand feeder for the hummingbird.
Oh, the hand feeder. You can find them on Amazon or in bird stores, Wild Birds Unlimited. They're very inexpensive. I think they come in a pack of 5.
How long did it take until you got them?
2 days. 2 days after doing it for about 15 minutes each day. They're among the most fearless birds around. They're so tiny, but they will come around and buzz you if you're standing next to their food. And so any new feeder, even if it's on your hand, is something that they will investigate. And I think that it's a fun way to get close up with birds.
They're very generous with their time. Hummingbirds are.
Thank you.
Amy, thank you for doing this work. I've been a birder for 40 years, and it's so wonderful to have a representative like you introducing birds to an audience of people who maybe aren't as familiar. I'm also a journalist and a fan of Jack, and I had a quick question about your process, because I like to journal too. When you're working on something that's a more finished product, do you like to do in situ sketches in prep for that, or do you mostly like to work from the photos that you take?
I work directly from the photos. You have to realize I'm not really trained as much as an artist who does, all the different facets that many artists would employ when they're drawing, which are those detailed studies, both in a foreground and a background. I don't have that skill, so I just go either really rough sketches, quick sketches, or I go to a more detailed drawing just looking at a photo. I do make an outline of the bird in pencil, very light pencil, and then I start filling in different areas and layering the colors with the pencils. I learned about color by actually trying to use a lot of colored pencils. I have probably 5 different brands of colored pencils. And the ones that I love the most are called Caran d'Ache, and there's a set, I think, of 74 colored pencils. But with that, I can really play with it and blend and try to get the direction of the feathers. I'm a person who just does one flick at a time when I'm doing these drawings, because it's a meditation for me, not simply drawing. I do not sell my drawings. I do not give them to anyone. They're just strictly my birds. So now they're in a book. I had expected a lot of people to say, real artists to say, she can't draw, this feather is not in the right place, or all of those things. And I decided it doesn't matter. I did this for myself. I wasn't trying to prove anything at all about this. And it was actually my editor came to me and said, how's that novel going? And I had to say, and then he said, how about we publish your journal? And I said, no, that journal is not what you think it is. It's a lot of messy sketches. It's not the pretty birds that you see that I've sent to you. It has smudges, coffee stains, wine stains. And he said, the magic words, that's authentic. If you have a messy house, if you look in the morning, your face is askew, you just say, that's authentic. And it's true. It is a great word for saying this is real, this is who you are, this is what it's about in life. We're not all perfect. Nothing is perfect to begin with. So I love that he said that, and that's what convinced me to say, okay, as long as everybody understands this is authentic, then you can publish it, and I just hope it sells enough copies that people will not get mad that they paid money for this book and it, turned out to be. So it went to number 1 when it launched and on the New York Times list. And it's still on the list. It dropped off the list for 2 months because they ran out of stock for 2 months, and the stores gradually depleted their supply. So it went from 1 to 4 on the New York Times to nothing. And for a while, and then we had to relaunch. Today, they just announced it is the gift book of the year for Barnes & Noble stores nationwide. So they're great people. I've met the booksellers, Barnes & Noble people, but I do have a fondness in my heart for independent booksellers. And so all of the stores I visited, except for one, all of the stores I visited in 35 cities were independent bookstores. And I really encourage you to get your books from Copperfields, who are here today and are so kind to be here and help us with this event. So.
I have a very practical question. We have a lot of bird feeders in our yard, and we always discuss, can we combine different kinds of food, how far apart do you separate the different kinds that are attracting different birds? Is it a problem when they're all together in the same area?
I haven't found that to be true except with larger birds. For example, crows, jays, band-tailed pigeons, mourning doves, because they crowd out the other birds. There are certain birds that are more aggressive, but for me, instead of seeing it as a problem, I saw it as an opportunity to look at very interesting behavior, and that is, what do birds do to defend their food sources, for example, or when they're just too close together. And it is not as obvious as you might imagine that they would chase off birds that are not of their own kind. And in fact, among the golden-crowned sparrows, I see them more bullying their younger members of the tribe. And then when it's another species, sometimes they will tolerate that species. So I have photos of like a golden-crowned sparrow sitting in a bath with a hermit thrush, and they kind of start splashing a lot. It's like that Annie Oakley song, I can shoot, what is it? Anything you can do, I can do better. And that's what they were doing for a long time, and then finally they calmed down and they just sat there and bathed. But when a younger member of the tribe of golden-crowned sparrows came, immediately that bird was kicked out of the bath water.
Of the experience you're having over here on the side.
The picture
of you and the bird.
Oh, that bird. That is a cheat. That is not a wild bird. That's a cockatoo. A cockatiel. It was a friend of mine. That bird belonged to some friends, And I saw it at their house, and I just fell in love. And I said, if you ever need a baby bird sitter, I'm your person. And they said, oh, we'll do that. They go out of town a lot. And so I went to the store. I bought actually a bigger bird cage than what they had. And they had a pretty big bird cage, but I bought a bigger one, and I bought real branches, that had been cured and were sanitized, and I bought different feeders and a little place where it could sleep in private and all of this stuff, toys and all of this. And then I took care of this bird for a week. And during that time, nobody could open the doors. We had to know where he was. Where's Yoda? Where's Yoda? Keep the doors closed until the bird was flying around in our bedroom. We'd have all the doors, and it would land on us. Well, one day it landed on me, and I had my phone, and I just clicked it. And that is the photo. It is my jacket photo. It is a selfie. And you have to put down the name, the credit for these photos. So I put down my Chinese name, Unmei Tan, instead of selfie. But yeah, I had professional take my photo, but this is the one I like the best. So I used it. Unfortunately, Yoda died in an accident, so I ended up giving the cage and all the things that I had bought to Wild Care Rehab Center, because they can use that either for their ambassador birds or the birds that they are nursing when they have an influx of certain kinds of birds they need to take care of. So went to a good cause. It was just too heartbreaking for me to try and get another cockatiel to babysit.
Are you still buying the mealy worms by the 20,000?
Not during the winter. And the reason why is that I get these huge influxes of the golden crowned sparrows, which, by the way, come down from northern Canada or Alaska, thousands of miles to come to my yard. And that's not a joke, actually. They have very good GPS systems for going back to their summer home and going to where they spend their winter, where they overwinter. And the reason why I know that they are the same birds is that I built these cages for the birds that exclude larger birds and other animals. And they are difficult for the birds to get into at first. They will spend hours or even days learning how to get inside. And when these birds come back in the fall, and the older ones, the ones with the very dark brows and the very golden, yellow, neon golden crown, when they fly in immediately and start eating the suet, I know that bird has been here. And when the younger ones that are there and have not been in the yard because they were born in the spring, and they are called first winter birds, they've never been in my yard, and they stand outside the cage. It takes them a while to realize there's food in there. And then it takes them a while before they try to go in, and it can take them days before they finally learn how to do it and go back and forth often. I have since discovered that birds have a very small geographic area to which they return and where their home is, their summer home is, and so that my guess is a pretty plausible one based on that behavior of the familiarity of the birds in our yard. And I know that they prefer the suet when they first get here. It's a very fatty food, and they need those energy resources immediately. So I can't remember the original question. I went off, and this bird, the mealworms, 20,000, no, because they would decimate 20,000 in a day. And I wait until the spring when the birds are nesting, the resident songbirds in my yard, the junco, that's a junco daddy, and there was the oak titmice, the chickadees. They are all resident pygmy nuthatches. Then I bring out the mealworms, and I'll see mom and dad coming back and forth every 30 seconds to get a mealworm, and they load up with sometimes 5 or 6 of them, dropping a few along the way. They will eat, like this particular junco ate about 5 or 6 of them, and then after that picked up more and carried it in its bill up to the nest. And so I just see that all the time, and that's enough. These little birds will decimate, at least 2,000 a day. And so I have to save it that's when they really need it, the energy to go back and forth. And there is the possibility that if they have adequate resources for feeding and they don't have to spend a lot of their energy looking for food, that they will have perhaps more eggs, more successful hatchlings, more birds that go from nestling to fledgling. And the fledglings, I found, depend on those resources as well. They need to learn, and I see them learning in the trees or in certain areas, getting food, hunting, and learning to do that. But little birds are very unsuccessful. About 75% of birds do not make it to adulthood. If you see an adult bird, it's a miracle. You just say, this is one tough fighter. And if there's anything that I learned about birds, it's that each day is a chance to survive. So I don't mind providing them with extra food. I see the young ones go into these cages. They are pecking around, very unsuccessful. They go into the cage, and at least they have something they can eat to sustain them, because some of the young birds are very little songbirds. If they don't eat for a day or two, they're basically dead. So of that 75% that don't make it to adulthood, 40% of those die within the first 2 weeks after fledging. So the little birds, and it's often because they haven't learned adequately to feed themselves. They're not afraid of predators, and they will sit out in the open too much. I do see, when I see little birds sitting out for too long, I will go out and scare them away, because I want them to know they should not do that kind of behavior. A lot of things they need to learn. Yeah. If you see a little bird, a little fledgling out there, oftentimes it's a bird that's fallen out, it's ready to fledge, it just hasn't learned to fly adequately. Some people say just leave it there. I say look for the nest, try to put it back to the nest or where the parents are. Also, put it in a safe place. Don't leave it on the sidewalk where a cat will get it. Find a little place that's a little hidden up high, and you can do that. If the bird really seems to be having trouble, take the bird to your rehab center. It's amazing, these people at rehabs, wildlife rehab centers, they're so good. They will take a baby rock pigeon, that a lot of people hate, and take care of that. At least wild care where we are, they will take any bird. And so that is something to think about. If you do have a bird in your possession, a little bird that's hit a window or seems to be not doing so well, put it in a small box with air holes. Don't put any food or water in there. Let it rest. Keep it in a dark place it's warm, and then take it to rehab center. They may not make it. A lot of the birds that I've kept and taken to the rehab centers, about half of them don't make it. So, but those who do just fills me with gratitude. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you.